time I go to sit down in front of this thing. All right, so the Sentinels setting. I think this isn't what I said. I think I'd do the next video. I'm done trying to predict where things are going to lead me on any given day. It doesn't seem to be going in a way that makes sense. The hazards of the current environment seem to be that there's increased demand for people to work retail for food and other necessity sales. And so my hours got jumped. So I'm doing more work than I would have otherwise these times, rather than being able to, what is it? Oh, they're asking us to seclude ourselves. What's the term they use? It doesn't matter. Doesn't frickin' matter. Unimportant. So my scenario right now is that I find myself working a lot more, and when I'm not working, trying to get the things I need to secure my own safety and well-being in the few spare minutes that more and more places are no longer open. So I find myself fairly tired fairly easily right now. I think that's part of what's going on right now. Now, excuse me. The setting that I am working on for this one is, and I think I found a way to refer to these now in a way that makes more sense. We have the overarching cosmogony of the greater shebang that I've built. I still don't know what to call that, but instead of calling them sub-worlds or sub-settings or things like that, I want to be able to refer to them as sundry. So you have the overarching one. It's like sauce and sundry or all in sundry. It's basically a way of saying, and this loose collection of other things. So I want the Empyrean realm to sort of be the central core of the idea, and then have this ability to have these loose collections of modular worlds you can plug into this central one and play any one of them. So I do want to call it something and sundry, but figuring out, well, I mean, the Empyrean realms and sundry realms, I don't know what to call the whole thing yet. Because here's the thing, like, generally speaking, a campaign is a story with a beginning, middle, and end. This is built not to be that in particular. You have a stage on which worlds are built and taken down. The theater, the arena where events take place, but whole worlds can be built and assembled and constructed and taken apart. So what you have is this place in which the problem with calling it a world is it's not a world. It's not a singular monumental megalithic construction. It's a clockwork. Ooh, no. There's a part of me want to call it like the orrery, the mechanical universal models where different worlds move around the central. Yeah, it's sort of like, that's more what I'm thinking of. Because this isn't one world, one campaign, one setting. That's the problem with calling it a setting, is it's a setting that has subsettings that are whole settings in and of themselves. And I don't know what to call that. But I know now that I can call the subsettings sundry settings or sundry realms. So that was just an aside note to get us started with. But one of these sundry realms is the Sentinels. And the Sentinel setting takes place on the world of Ort, O-R-T. And I've sort of dubbed the genre in my mind as the Capes and Tabards. And it's not Capes and Tabards, because that, like, the style of wearing a tabard with a cape is not that unusual a depiction of fantasy or medieval setting, but it's capes, as in superhero capes, in tabards. So I call it capes and tabards just as a mental note in my own head. But I sort of played around with it a little bit in the meantime. One of the hurdles I was coming across last time was wanting to distinguish or separate the fact that each of my sundry worlds, sundry realms, has a tendency to have races and beings that aren't represented in the overworld of the Empyrean realms. So the Empyrean realms has the Gnomoids, the humans, the gnomes, the dwarves, and the fae, or the Dwergar and the fae. And that distinction makes it a little more important when I go into the Serpent's Children world, that there aren't Medusa characters in the Empyrean realm. And when we go into the Merc setting, there aren't these symbiotic, parasitic puddings or tar-like creatures, amorphous beings that reside in the Empyrean realm. There's some things that are similar, like the oozes, the ones I ended up naming. What was it? What, the Raka? Yeah, Yaraka, snot in Finnish. Reka, or something like that. And so, like, the symbiotic parasitic entities from the Merc setting don't have their equivalent in the Empyrean realm. And the Merc setting could have other races, but feels like it's predominantly human as well. Maybe just allow some other variants of some things in there. I thought about that one a little bit, actually, as something I may throw in. That was one of the other things I was struggling with the Merc setting, actually, was, did I want to include, like, I don't have a space for orcs and half-orcs or those types of characters. They may be the other thing, that's the other races that are playable in the Merc setting. But in Sentinels, it's predominantly humans, except for the ones that turn into mutants and become monsters. But we also have the possibility of the demi-human changelings. And demi-human is a phrase that's used through early D&D for elves and dwarves and whatnot. They're the humanoids that you can play as other races. Now, in my Empyrean realm, I have the Dwergar, the Fae, and the Nossi gnomes. Yeah, there we go. Nissi or Nossi, yeah, is the term I use for them. And so I have those other races that you can play in the Empyrean realm, and then their sub races. So I didn't really want to have any of them be the changelings, the demi-human changelings. I debated it a little bit about the possibility of elves or dwarves from the Empyrean realm sending their child to live amongst the Sentinel setting, the world of Ort, just at the possibility of, that gives them an excuse to come from another world kind of thing. The problem I have with that is the idea is supposed to be that you send them there as the last son of Krypton kind of theme, but the Empyrean realm isn't a realm that's now destroyed. So I don't want them to be. They can't be the last son of Krypton if Krypton is still out there floating around, moving along on its own happy little course. That's not the goal. They don't send you to the Sentinel realm. You're the only one, you're the last one of your kind on the world. You can't do that if it's not the case. So I don't want it to be the Fae or the Nissi or the Dwergar. I want it to be something that's unique to the Sentinel setting. Or, well, not necessarily unique to that setting, but something not found in the Empyrean realm. And so looking at that, I said, well, look, I've made efforts to make my Empyrean realm entities distinct from classic fantasy. So what's to prevent us from doing the classic fantasy versions of some of those? So I have the idea that the demi-human changelings could be classic elves, the Tinker Gnome, and the Selkie, which is an actual mythological creature that I don't have an equivalent of in the Empyrean realm. The gnomes I have in the Empyrean realm are much more diminutive. Yes. And the elves of the Empyrean realm are more, they're not elves. They're really meant to be fae. They're distinctive. They're sort of like giant fairies. Whereas classic, Lord of the Rings style elves are different. Now we do run the risk of the half breeds of the gnomoids are like the half elves, the halflings, the half dwarves, the holder folk, the dwarf gnomes, and the dwarf elf, which I call the Alfar. That's where we get really, really, really close to touching on. So if we did the dwarf elf hybrid from the Empyrean realm, the Alfar, they're going to be very similar to the classic elf, but they're not quite the same thing. Now, the Tinker Gnomes from specifically Dragonlance, but they're used a little bit in some other settings. They're distinctive enough from my gnomes, as well as the regular D&D gnomes. I don't know that I want to call them Tinker Gnomes, but I'll think about it. I'm not sure I'd even want to call them gnomes. I debate whether I want to call them dwarves, because they have a lot more in common with the dwarves of the Norse mythology, in that they craft amazing things. So I'm going to have to think about that a little bit. But I like the idea that because my overarching story has gone its own direction with its own sub-races, that the Sentinel setting could have the more close to the generic versions of them, and they would be distinctively different. Oh, God. Can't keep my energy levels up. This is cool. All right. The Dhampir, Shifters, Genasi, Tieflings, and Celestials sort of work as they are for the Sentinel setting. They do kind of touch on stuff in the Empyrean realm. No, let's see, where are they? Gnomoid. No, the bestial forms, nope. Elementals. Okay, so there we go. We have the Genasi. And then we have the harpy is, one of those things I have to address there. And the wares are something there. The angelic and demonic aspects have their representation in there. Yeah, I think those are the big hazards of overlap. The Dhampir and the Shifters. Shifters are, I feel they're at least a little different enough from the Antherians and Therianthropy category that they're sort of distinct to that world. The Genasi are, I think, are the only overlap per se. Do I have a category for tieflings? No, I think I sort of just eased that one out. Human, yeah, I think that's sort of what I did with some of that. All right, so I think overall I've eased some of that complication out. I still got to figure how I'm going to handle the Genasi. The distinction between plain touched and Genasi, I think, is going to be the important one. But past that, I think I resolved some of my discomfort with that. I got to still figure out how I'm going to handle the fact that my mutants are drawing too heavily on what exists in the Empyrean realm. I may have to just opt in and just pick a bunch of other monsters that people can shift into, monsters with certain powers. And once we've resolved all of that, I think we're in a good position. Everything seems to work out right there. Now it becomes a question of structure of things like, is there a shield organization, the kingdom and its relationship to maybe other kingdoms around the world, and then the actual city-state that each individual is, or each city-state that's an option to start out in, and their police force and their law enforcement and their structure of society. And fleshing that out a little bit more to get a sense of the individual city-states, kingdoms, I think I'm going to delve a little bit more to get familiar with some of the aspects of, I believe it's Eberron, that has a lot of that city. And I might even look at Ravnica also, because they both have that mega city structure that sort of delineates the city needed for a superhero setting. I think it's really hard to do a superhero setting where the heroes live in rural villages. You kind of have to have that mass of humanity to make it work right. So the metropolis city will probably be modeled slightly after some of the information for some of the cities in Eberron, and actually that might not be a bad one to look at. I believe, trying to remember, I believe in the Eberron setting, I'll have to take a look. There's a city on the northern side of the continent that has various monsters as citizens. So I may delve a little bit into that. At any rate, we are at midnight here. This is a shorter one. I'm feeling a little rough and tired, so I'm probably going to call it real soon here and head to bed. Thanks for stopping in, I guess, and I will ask you to take care of yourself, stay healthy, and have a good night.